Let's get to our first discussion for the first workday of the week. Moscow's war on Ukraine and the fierce financial backlash it's unleashed are not only inflicting on an economic catastrophe on Russia, but also as the global economy, with Nigeria not excluded. As the conflicts between both countries enter its day 12 or 12th day, the global economy has been projected to remain highly fluid, and the outlook is subject to extraordinary uncertainty. In Nigeria, energy and commodities prices, which includes wheat and other grains, have surged, leading to inflationary pressure from supply chain disruptions and the rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic. It will also interest you to know that if the conflict should escalate, the damage on both the domestic and global economy will no doubt be more devastating, as price shocks will have a negative impact, especially on poor households for whom food and fuel are a higher proportion of their expenses. Joining me live from our Abuja studios to assess the impact of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, of course, by Russia on both domestic and global economy is a partner and senior economist at SPL Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Good afternoon, Mr. Alaje. Thank you for joining us this Monday.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I want to start with the kind of trade relations we have, even with Russia. Looking at, don't let us even look at the figures at the moment, because that is not where I'm going. But the effect of this ongoing crisis on both the domestic and global market cannot be overemphasized. A lot of comments have coming through. First, Mr. Alaje, I know you've been following the situation. What is your reaction to this development?
Well, my immediate reaction is coming with mixed feelings. At a time like this, Nigeria should be benefiting from the ongoing invasion by Russia in Ukraine. Unfortunately, we are not prepared for gains as a country, and I will tell you why. On one hand, we have Russia invasion, which have led to a sporadic increase in the cost of crude per barrel. As we speak, we are talking of well over 120, well over 130 barrels, cost of one barrel for crude, you know. And Nigeria is set to, according to our 2022 budget, about 1.88 million barrels a day, even though we are not doing as much. So it means that we should be generating more revenue, and our government should have more revenue to spend. It also means that ordinarily our foreign reserve should swell. But that's not what we are having. You know why? Because as we are collecting from one hand, we are spending from the other hand. If the cost of crude increases, it's going to have tremendous negative impact on the cost of PMS. And PMS is what we consume locally. So we have disruption, which is another conversation. The fact that the price of crude is increasing, we are going to have central bank release more when we now want to purchase PMS for our population. That's on one hand. Two, NNPC will now need to spend more money to import, or with the partners NNPC has. And that exactly is the issue. Government used to spend about 1.8 trillion naira for subsidy. It might now need to spend even more, because when cost of crude was around $65-67 dollars per barrel, now we are talking of well over. If we are still getting the PMS, it means that government must be ready to pay double of what is paying in subsidy before now. Now the question is, should we still be subsidizing? And this is where those viewing us today, or those that will see this program in future, needs to pay critical attention. People have said there is subsidy, there is no subsidy. Several government and anti-government have said there is subsidy, there is no subsidy. But as economists, the real conversation that many people are not talking about is the quality of Naira. So just listen to this. In 2010, what was exchange rate? Exchange rate was about a bit above 1/4 of what we are spending today. The one many of us will remember very quickly is what exchange rate was in around 2016 at about 260, 270. But when you look at it 10 years, 10 years before now, is around 130, 140, maximum 150. So if we had maintained the quality of naira in the last 10 years, and the kind of increase we have seen at about 416, 417 is not what we have today, nobody will be talking about we are bringing subsidy. Mismanagement of quality of naira, aka exchange rate, aka over importation, poor businesses not exporting well enough to meet up with what we are importing is the real reason why we are here. That is if we still want to import PMS. But what is a more lasting solution is for us to produce, to refine this PMS locally. And unfortunately, it's taking forever. In 2012, you know, we had a lot of Nigerians took to street, and government had promised at that time that within 2 years, maximum 3 years, Nigeria will refine crude locally. As at that time, we had 4 refineries that were turning, you know, but they could not perform. Government kept turning around the refineries. And as we speak, till today, 2022, exactly 10 years from the last protest on removal of subsidy till now, nothing. Nigeria does not even produce 1 liter. Refined 1 liter locally. It is that bad. So if you have a car, we say we want to consume, we want to buy refined PMS from Nigeria, it is not available anywhere. So when we say that we want to remove subsidy, the question is 2 key factors that have made subsidy to reappear. Number 1 is quality of naira, which is evident in what monetary authority should do, fiscal and trade authority should have done. The truth is that we have left naira to continue to fall against the dollar, not knowing that we are not exporting. It would have been good news if we are a net exporter, if we export more like we have in China, producing for the rest of the world. That is not what we are doing today. So the impact of poor exchange rate is what we are seeing in subsidy today. That on one hand. On the second hand, we are also not producing. We are not refining locally. I've heard a lot of people say, let's wait, the private refinery is coming mainstream. That is good, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient because when that comes mainstream, what you'll be faced with is monopoly. And you and I know that for business, we cannot rely on a monopolistic environment. What we need is for competitors to come around. And I have suggested, and many of us have said it time and again, that for government to keep turning around refineries that have refused to turn or to perform, rather than having cost without production, without benefit, why not give it to competent private sector? And I'm saying this with a lot of caution. Not just anybody that show around, not just cronies of government or friends to government. We are talking of people with proven organization, with proven track record. We've seen what we did with power. And today, Nigeria are saying they are paying for not having power. They were competent organization in terms of power. In terms of power distribution or generating company that would have given us well more than what we have today. But that's not the case when it came to when we discuss Nigeria. So on one hand, we want to do politics. On the other hand, we want efficiency. Unfortunately, without competition, and I mean positive competition, competition under good environment, we cannot have the kind of results we hope to see as a country. And that is why we have the kind of economic environment we have today. And what is the implication for Nigerians? Because PMS is energy, electricity is energy. I can talk in your studio in Abuja today because I have energy. You can talk in Lagos because you have energy. The driver of the economy are what we call energy, which includes PMS, which we are going to drive you for you to facilitate trade by driving in your car, or if you are in Molue, quote and unquote, or if you are in mass transit. It is that will drive. 2, we need something to also drive factory. Because the 2 have continued to increase, farmers will also charge more for their 2 balls of yam. You say, oh, why? Farmers, how is it going to have implication? Because they also send their children to school and they will need to enter the same, and that's their source of livelihood. So it's going to lead to sporadic inflation. And you're going to see if what is going on between Moscow, and Russia, and Ukraine is not controlled, in the next 6 months, you might see inflation going back to as high as 18%. And you know that this is the second time we have had inflation touch 18% twice in the last 6-7 years. We hope that alternative will be provided, but if this alternative is just a way for private refinery to come and not give the 4 refineries we have, either as PPP to private sector to manage, run, and produce and give to to give to Nigerians, I'm afraid we might just be faced with what I call unnecessary uncompetitive environment by giving it to by giving it to one individual. And I hope that government will listen and government will do the needful in no time.
Great stuff. Well said, because one way or the other, when we have these discussions, it's kind of stays more with the oil and gas space, because that is where we really have issues around forex, dysfunctionality in the downstream, and all of that. But I want to ask you this also straight up, as that today diesel sells for more than 600 naira per liter, and it's deregulated. Kerosene, of course, is also on the high side. I've asked oil and gas professionals this same question, and I want you as an economist to also advise. What do you make of what we got from deregulating these two products? So if we deregulate PMS, don't you think this is part of the fear of Nigerians, that we might buy fuel as much as maybe 500 naira per liter? Later it could come down, but how long will we wait before it later comes down, when that competition will be high?
Well, it might be in the long run, and in the long run could be when we are all dead. That is when you should expect reduction in prices. And that is why we've said, unlike how we quickly compare the oil and gas sector as well as power sector to telco. You know, the difference between what happened in telco, oil and gas, and the rest was that for telco, we have private sector took ownership of the sector. You could port your SIM from one network to another. Now, power sector, which is what we are familiar with, that's why I'm bringing power into this conversation. And that's the mistake we want to make with oil and gas. And it's important for those who can listen to listen and go back to the boardroom and rethink over the decision of government. For power, we said we have deregulated, at least what we cannot see, which is the distribution. Now ask, in Lagos, you're on the mainland, if you don't want to use Ikeja Electric, which other option do you have? It is monopolistic. No. If you don't want to use, for people on the island in Lagos, you don't want to use Eko Electric. For people in Ibadan, if you don't want to use IBDC or so, you know, Ibadan Distribution Company, which extend to, Osun State. Osun. And for those in Abuja, for those in Kano, different distribution. You are forced to use a single company. For oil and gas, the challenge is once right now we're in the hand of NNPC, are solely importer with the partner, whatever they say is what we accept. It is still monopoly. If you want to deregulate, one of the things with deregulation is that there must be competition. Not 1, not 2, not 3, minimum of 4, so that we don't deal with either monopoly or duopoly. Oligopoly could still be managed, you know, but we need as many as possible operators to come. Those with gas, you know, technically through policy, they have not been permitted to operate within the sector. And for oil and gas, we might continue to see this. Unfortunately, government will need to keep carrying the burden, even though this will affect the revenue government we get. You've seen IMF, World Bank advise Nigerian government to hands off subsidy. But government knows that the fundamental have not yet been provided, which will be evident in competition locally for those private sector to take over. And I think by now, government should have built the way to a competent company, those who can manage our private sector. Again, government through central bank can intervene very quickly for those that have license for modular refinery to quickly come mainstream. If we don't solve our problem and we want quick fixes, I can confirm to you that will lead to bigger problem. Diesel is 600. What it means is that for what we all consume, bag of rice, by December, expect 40,000 naira minimum. This is because millers will use diesel, not just what the party is saying on farms. Millers will use diesel to parboil. They will use diesel to dry and most importantly, to process, from cleaning, destoning, up to packaging. Diesel will run in the factory. We all do not know about all of those, but for us to have the kind of what we can consume locally, we will need to pay more. And this may lead a bag of rice to 40,000. What is minimum wage? 30,000. If we cannot buy a bag of rice, then we have a lot to be worried about.
Indeed, a lot to be worried about. Now, staying with the hike in the price of crude, because this seems to be very significant in this conversation as we move on. This could also lead to imported inflation, you've identified that. But let's now talk about the impact on federal allocation. That's a fact and all of that. You know, the governors at the time, they came together to support the removal of subsidy. But NNPC and, of course, the federal government had to say, no, let's still sit down with labor and get all of this sorted out. Now, what impact do you think this would have? Because a lot of money the NNPC is going to be bridging subsidy, so they won't have enough to support FAC. There was a drop, even in February, the amount that was shared.
Well, a lot, we would expect a further drop if the situation is not managed. The challenge I have is that we are not having a long perspective into thinking of government revenue and expenditure. And we might see most likely a further drop, because if NNPC needs to pay more in terms of subsidy, then we have less and less to get from what is selling in crude. Like I said, we are using 2 or 3 fingers to collect from the left, but we are using 5 fingers to give on the right, and that causes for worry. So for states, especially those that are working with states, government may now need to start to put a stop to some of the capital projects, especially government that are not going to borrow money more easily, if their capacity does not make provision, they don't have room for borrow. They will need to deal with what they get in IGR, which I think they need to stimulate, and what they will get from FAC. If FAC is reducing, government at the state level, most especially, they want to quickly pay salaries and deal with other recurrent issues. But you know, after that, what happens to common man that is not working within government or working as civil servant? Big issue that we need to deal with. Capital expenditure may reduce. It will now further reduce the net assets that is available within our country, and this is a big concern that a lot of us will still need to worry about again.
Mr. Paul, let's wrap up on the note of talking about trade relations now between both countries, not even Russia and Nigeria. We know what's been happening with regards to the Jalkuta steel revitalization that the government has been talking about, and on the verge of almost implementation, COVID struck. Now again, this is happening, Russia invading Ukraine. Do you think some of our international commitments or projects or all of that will be affected, and how will this impact trade one way or the other?
Well, I think wisdom for all countries is to hands off in terms of relating with the two countries, because if you are relating with Ukraine now and it's evident Russia and the ally of Russia, we think Nigeria has taken sides, and that is why I was very happy when the minister mentioned that Nigerians will not be allowed to go and fight for or against any of the countries, which I think is wisdom right now. Again, for the relationship we have with Russia, I think we need to have a way of intervening. Committee of countries, we need to come together to have a way of intervening instead of attack. And I'm also happy that the West did not consider no flight zone, because if that had happened, we are talking of having PMS. Even to bring it to this side of the world may become a challenge, because I know some other countries may get involved, and that could affect trade. And when there is no trade, we're as good as going back to COVID. We are still having trade, and we are seeing inflation inching towards what we had during COVID. So we need to ensure that war it does not grow to a full-blown war. If it goes to that, World War III, God forbid, is what the world may experience. But we hope that it will be managed by different powers around the world and different authorities around the globe, so that we don't experience another hardship by telling people to stay at home, this time not because of a disease, but because of guns and because of machetes and bombs everywhere. But we hope that it will not get to that before this issue between Russia and Ukraine is resolved.
So finally, let you do this. Let's project. Despite the fact that we have all of these challenges globally, domestically, we've seen projections and reprojections. IMF, World Bank, everyone looking at the whole situation of things. What are you thinking as we move in 2022? It was scary when you said inflation could get as much as 18%. Mr. Paul, that's very serious.
Well, first of all, I think Monetary Policy Committee, if they don't take decision in their next meeting to increase rates, the meeting after that, they would have to increase rates. It's just the obvious. Because as inflation goes up, we are now going to see what our GDP will be in terms of stabilizing. Because before now, we've been comparing it with negative growth, which have been giving us positive growth. But by the time we see Q4 and Q1 report, which should come out, Q1 should come out maybe in the next 2-3 months, we should see what Q1 report is. By the time you compare Q1 and Q2, if it's giving us positive response, then you will see that Monetary Policy Committee may be coming with an increase in monetary policy rate. If that happens, it might also mean that it could be relatively difficult to borrow money, but that will definitely attract more investment to Nigeria, which is what we need, especially investment into subnational, because when you go to subnational, everybody seems to largely depend on the federal government. At least 28 states today depend largely on what is coming from FARC, without which they cannot proceed. So if we don't do that, then the opposite is what we'll be looking higher unemployment, definitely inflation will increase. I only hope it will not get to as high as 18%, but if this war continues in the next 6 months, it might get to 18%. It was lockdown, it was a border closure that government implemented, and I had a discussion with you that border closure will be equal to inflation. In few months down the line, we saw inflation went as high as 18%. Before government reversed the policy, the inflation is still present, and we saw how that led, even during COVID, I became even poorly managed. But today we are seeing inflation ease, but because of this war, PMS has major importance when it comes to inflation competition, and we have continued to see even pump price. I've been to a number of states, and I can tell you, apart from FCT and Lagos, have not been able to buy PMS at 165. Even in some places, in one of those two places, it has even been higher. But I bought as high as 250 directly from machine. And if you don't want to buy, they ask you to go 220. The least has been 210, in one of the states. But majorly from reports we're also getting from our researchers outside Abuja and Lagos, they have been selling as high as 200, 215, 250. That's what people are selling directly from pump, especially in the middle of the night when people have queued and they need to continue their work. All of this will have implication on prices, it will have implication on loaf, it will have implication on all other things that we are consuming and prices we are charging. We only hope that the government will intervene. I'm happy NNPC said he has brought over 300 million liters, and the challenge with that is a good one NNPC has done, but I'm not sure we even know the actual number of consumption we have today. Most of the things we have are estimates, and that is why population sensor is very important. We also need to do sensor beyond number of people. We need to know how many cars, with precision, how many cars do we have in Nigeria that are functioning, so that we can know how many people are consuming our PMS, how many generators are there. We need data. We need to be quite big, and I think government can work with Ministry of Education to ask Nigerian universities, to go big in the study of data and admit more people, even if it's going to be fully on scholarship. Nigeria has started suffering from data-related issues, and we need to, because some of the challenges we have, data will help us to fight them. Big data is what we need, and unfortunately, I cannot pinpoint 1, 2, or 10 institutions that are really working or keen on those. So, Ministry of Education, we have University Research Institute that can help us make it a department. Let more and more people get into it, from BS even to master's level, so that we can solve some of our problems before they become full-blown trouble that we have in the country today.
Starting the week, and he's a senior economist and partner at SPM Professional, speaking on the Russian and Ukraine invasion and what it means, of course, for the global economy, and Nigeria also in focus. Thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.